To give us further insight into the pornography age verification case at the Supreme Court, we're joined by Clare Morell, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. Her area of expertise is big tech and how to protect children from social media's negative influences. She's the author of the forthcoming book, The Tech Exit, a practical guide to freeing kids and teens from smartphones. It comes out in June. Clare, thank you so much for joining us. Give us a sense of this case. Why did the Supreme Court agree to take it, and did oral argument point in any direction of a potential outcome?
Yes, absolutely. The court took up this case because now over 19 states have passed these laws, and the last time that the Supreme Court considered an age verification law was in 2004. That was over 20 years ago, in a completely different era of the internet. And so I think that the justices, and this was demonstrated in oral arguments, were very interested in reevaluating age verification laws and their constitutionality in light of the vast technological changes we've seen in the last 20 years. In 2004, in the last case when they heard an age verification law was Ashcroft versus ACLU, smartphones and social media didn't even exist. And so the facts have very much changed. And I think the court then was eager to take this up. I mean, more procedurally, the reason they took this is because a Texas age verification law was originally enjoined in a district court in Texas, but then the Fifth Circuit overturned that injunction and upheld the law as constitutional. And so then that led to the appeal up to the Supreme Court and their interest in taking this on. And I was very encouraged by oral arguments. I felt like 7 of the 9 justices seemed to be strongly indicating that states need to be able to legislate in this important area to protect kids online, and seem to be willing to apply a lesser degree of scrutiny than we've seen in the past than was the case in Ashcroft versus ACLU, which was strict scrutiny, which is the highest constitutional hurdle to overcome. And so they all seemed very willing to try to apply some lower level of scrutiny to allow states more flexibility in this area.
And it's an interesting divide that we're seeing with those 19 states that do have age verification protocols. It's a divide in the country that shows that the debate is robust for the Supreme Court to weigh in. Clare, at the center of this case is whether or not the protection of minors really is a state issue. Is the government responsible for protecting children from pornography?
It's a complicated question. I would say ultimately, most people would agree that parents are responsible and they are on the front lines. But I think, as has been clearly demonstrated in this case, and the reason behind states bringing laws in this area is that parents with filters has not been enough. That has been the status quo of the last 20 years. And unfortunately, the rates of pornography exposure and addiction are just exploding. And it's because in this smartphone, social media era, a parent doing everything they can with filters simply is no match for pornography in the ways that it's so easy for a child to stumble across. Over half of teens are exposed accidentally, means they're not looking for it. They're coming across it through social media. And often these filters, they can't filter out the content inside of apps. They can't necessarily filter in-app browsers. There are ways to connect to the internet through these applications. And so it's very difficult for a parent to oversee. And as has been acknowledged for years in precedents in protecting children from obscenity, there is a compelling government interest. We recognize that there are societal costs and harms to pornography exposure. And in today's day and age, if a parent does everything they can, another child with a smartphone can just easily lean over and show a child pornography. And so individual families and parents aren't enough. And that's why states are saying we want to come to parents' aid and provide this critical layer of protection to back parents up. So it is, I think, an area that states do have a responsibility to protect our children and coming alongside parents to help them do so.
Now, protections for sexual content and pornography are based on free speech law. Many people are fearful of the effects that restricting access to pornography will have on other groups that have been targeted for speech restrictions. Are these worries well-founded? Is that actually a real fear?
No, this is a very narrowly tailored law. If you read the law, the kinds of sites that will be targeted are pornography websites, that they have to have over a third of material that is deemed harmful to minors. And if you read that material harmful to minors, it's clearly talking about obscenity and indecency, which there's an entire standard for in our Supreme Court precedent. They have defined how we judge what obscenity is. And this is really not a content focused restriction. It's not saying these websites even have to take down certain types of content. It's all about access. And they're trying to say adults can access this speech, but children cannot because it is harmful to them. And it has long been upheld that we can consider obscenity to minors as a more protective standard than what we would say is appropriate for adults. And so these laws are specifically just trying to restrict children's access to content on big pornography websites that would be considered obscene as to minors, again, under this very detailed criteria in the law. So this will not implicate free speech in other areas. And most importantly, it won't even implicate free speech in this area. Now, a lot of the content on these websites would be considered even obscene for adults, but that's not what's at issue. They're not saying adults can't access this content. And because our technology has advanced so much, age verification can now be done in ways that is anonymous and private and convenient for adults in less than 30 seconds without revealing any other personal information about themselves to the websites. And so it's not going to be a burden on adult speech in any way.
Now, that reality of how narrow and tailored this is really affects the way that those who are trying to fight porn addiction do their work. A ministry fighting porn addiction recently noted in an exclusive interview to EWTN that these age restrictions just aren't enough. Do you see a different path for protecting children and anyone from access to this harmful content?
I would just echo what they're saying. I think is that it's such a vast problem. There's no silver bullet solution. We need protection at all sorts of different layers. I think the age restrictions do play a critical role because if a child were to accidentally click on a link to Pornhub, it means they would not be able to actually get through to see that website's content. And now, of course, the big pornography websites aren't the only way kids are coming across pornographic material. And sadly, it's actually directly on the feeds of a lot of social media apps today. So it's certainly not a silver bullet, and no one is saying that. But what we are saying is that filters and individual parents is not enough. The government can help parents by putting the onus back on the pornography websites themselves to say you can't allow children onto your sites to access this harmful material. And so it is a critical layer of protection, but we need more. And so I'm encouraged that I think this is just the start of policy solutions in this area to try to better protect our kids online from this content.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for your analysis. We'd love to have you back on once the case is decided. Thank you.